Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this debate, which is part of the World School of Debating Championships. My name is Jordan, and I'll be your chairman for this debate. Seated next to me is Darren, who will be our timekeeper. The format of this debate is as follows. Each speaker will have 8 minutes to make their speech. After 1 minute, the timekeeper will signal once, like this. After the sound, the debaters on the other team may offer points of information to the speaker. The debaters must stand up when they offer points of information. The speaker holding the floor may choose to accept or decline the point when it is offered. At the 7-minute mark, the timekeeper will again signal like this. After this sound, no more points of information may be offered for the rest of the speech. At the 8-minute mark, the timekeeper will make a double signal like this. After this sound, the speaker must conclude within a few seconds. After the 6-minute speeches, each team has an opportunity to give a 4-minute reply speech. This can be made by either the first or second speaker on the team. No points of information are allowed during the reply speech. The opposition will make their reply speech first. Before the debate begins, the audience is reminded to switch off all mobile phones and anything else which might disturb the debate. Should you need to exit or re-enter the room for any reason during the debate, please wait until the end of the speech. In proposition for this debate, we have the team from the United States. The first speaker is Castro. The second speaker is Mickey. And the third speaker is Santi. In opposition, we have the team from South Africa. The first speaker is Desmond. The second speaker is Steven. And the third speaker is Gabe. The adjudicators for this debate are Miriam from Pakistan, Bill Brown from Australia, and Steve Mann from China. The motion for this debate is this House to ban political opinion polls. Without further ado, I invite the first speaker for the conversation to open the debate. Please welcome.
Members of the panel, I want you to imagine that you're an average voter. You're interested a little bit in politics, and so when a pollster calls you up, you're excited to share your opinions on universal health care. But instead of asking about your nuanced opinions, why you hold them, what systems you support, instead the pollster just asks, do you support this? Yes, no, sometimes, or maybe, without interrogating the actual reasons why you would hold that opinion. On side proposition today, we're going to tell you that polls are inaccurate, misleading, and have a distorting effect on public discourse. Because your voice shouldn't be reduced to a number, we're very proud of the votes. On side proposition, we think that the burden of today's debate is to show which side better helps the principle of democracy, i.e. which side provides the best way of encouraging the participation in the political system in a healthy way. For definitions, we're going to say that polls give pre-provided answers to voters and ask them to provide exactly which pre-provided answer they personally support the most. We're going to support a policy banning all polls, all exit polls in elections, all public opinion polls, all public policy polls, all polls regarding voters' opinions of candidates, everything. We're going to levy criminal charges against any organization or government that defies this policy, and we're going to impose fairly large fines. We think that there are other forms of engagement that these organizations can turn to that are far more constructive for democracy. With that, I'm going to be presenting our first two substantive arguments. First, that this improves the overall political system, and second, that this encourages better political discussion. Our third speaker will talk about the impacts on minorities and minority opinions. With that, our first substantive argument on overall benefits to the political system. We have 4 layers of analysis. The first is on individual participation, and we have 2 layers of analysis under this. First, if you were in the minority in the poll, and second, if you were in the majority in the poll. If you're in the minority on the poll, we think that there's a massive disincentive. You feel disheartened that you are in the minority, that the majority does not support your opinions, and that politicians will probably hew to the majority consensus. We think this discourages interaction with politics, which is particularly important in elections, because it polls the day before an election show that your side is only polling at 17%, who are far less likely to go out, because you believe that you simply cannot win, regardless of what actions you personally take. This is particularly disastrous because it tends to amplify the majority's winning margin, i.e. when people who are in the minority are discouraged from going out, the majority wins by a larger margin than is initially predicted. Second, if you are in the majority. Now we think that if you're in the majority in polls, it can also have a misleading psychological impression. Let me give you an example. In Israel's most recent parliamentary elections, the Conservative Alliance led by Benjamin Netanyahu in Likud was almost identically polled with Isaac Herzog's Zionist Union and other center-left parties. But after a poll on a week before the elections showed the Zionist Union somewhat heavily in the lead, the results on election day were almost entirely different. Likud and the right and the Conservatives won by a massive margin. And because of this, many pollsters have speculated that the polls actually had a depressing effect on politics, i.e. the voters in Zionist Union believed that they didn't need to go out anymore. And because of this, it led to the minority party vote. The second layer of analysis, no thank you, is how politicians react. We think that politicians inherently want to win elections. They want to hew to whatever the majority opinion is. And because of this, there's no room for nuance. So for instance, when polls show that Australia's carbon tax ought to be repealed, or at least voters think it ought to be repealed, Tony Abbott's government goes ahead and does exactly that, without asking whether a decreased carbon tax would be the appropriate solution. Because politicians simply want to get the most number of people, instead of asking the tough questions like, is there a better solution in the middle? What is the opinion of the minority? No thank you. The third thing that we want to talk about under our first argument is how this leads to more direct interaction. We think that politicians and polling organizations can easily send out public opinion polls when they want to find out information about what policies they ought to support. So for instance, if I want to find out voters' opinions on gun control, I can send out polls instead of interacting directly with voters. So instead of gaining a more nuanced appreciation of the opinions of my voters, I just get a, do we support this? Yes, 79%, no, 21%. It really doesn't give me any insight into what my constituents think or what might be better policies that they think I should adopt. Yes?
Polls give an important service by showing the voters just how many people are backing certain issues. It encourages discussion in the votership and allows for more informed estimate of decisions.
Not at all. In our second argument, I'm going to talk to you about how this actually decreases political participation when you're in the majority and when you're in the minority. So the fourth argument that we're going to bring is that polls are often misleading. The questions they ask are often phrased in biased ways that don't really give understandings to the various opinions. So even though two polls might look identical or claim to poll exactly the same issue, the specific wording of them might in fact encourage a bias on the part of people who answer. So in reality, we see polls are entirely inaccurate and will mislead both voters and politicians. The second overall argument, the second substantive argument that we have to bring is about how this affects political discussion. And we have 3 arguments under this. The first is about the herd effect. We think that when public opinion polls show that an opinion is popular, we think that a lot of people have a psychological predisposition to go towards the popular opinion. So for instance, in the 2012 Republican primary, there were approximately a dozen candidates, and each of them rose to prominence month after month. Polls showed that Herman Cain was popular, he gained a massive lead, then fell as soon as he failed in one debate. The same pattern was repeated for candidates like Rick Perry and Michelle Obama, because candidates went to debates and only fell out and only stopped supporting once they made insane and ridiculous statements. No thanks. The second argument that we want to bring under this is about essentializing political discussion. Now, we think that there should be lively public discourse about the solutions that our society supports to the most pressing problems. But polls don't show that at all. They don't give any comprehension of why voters want a policy. Instead, they say, do we support this? Always, never, sometimes, somewhere in between, without really articulating the reasons why. The third argument under our second substantive point is about the media effect, how the media treats public opinion polls. We think that when an issue is unpopular, or when an issue is popular, the media tends to report on the popularity rather than the nuance. So as an example, I'll take you in a moment. So for instance, right now Donald Trump is polling at approximately 20%. The story isn't on his past or on his policies of his sport. It's instead about his rise. It's
Generally, journalists and experts on news channels will give you reasons to why certain parts of performance is the way they are. That provides far more information than the alternative.
We think that you shouldn't be analyzing like the popularity of these candidates. We think that you should be analyzing their particular policies. So instead of asking how popular is this person and encouraging everyone to look at them and see how popular they are, we think that you should be interrogating their past, which is why candidates like Donald Trump can get away with being incredibly popular and making incredibly horrific statements, but the media just reports on the fact that from day to day they're gaining from 17 to 18 to 20 to 21%, without really explaining and articulating the reasons under them. On our side of the house, we think that all polls, all political opinion polls, present a misleading caricature of how politics actually functions, talking about popularity rather than the actual policies that will help to solve society's problems. On side proposition, we stand for truth, not the numbers. We're very proud of those.
And now it's open to case of the opposition. I call upon President.
Sorry. Thank you. The good thing about polls is they provide an objective, falsifiable fact about what is happening in the world. We're going to tell you that this is information that is relevant and useful to voters to use, that they should be allowed to have when making a decision about what party they think can best vote and represent them. So what do we support? We essentially support a democracy that gets a party into power that is best able to represent the views of the people that it got and makes the most people happy. So, what we're essentially going to tell you is one, the best way to do this is to provide people with information that they can make a choice and where when deciding which to use. Secondly, we're going to tell you that even if you don't like this sort of information, the alternatives are far worse. We're going to do this in the following case. Firstly, I'm going to talk about why this empowers individual choice. Secondly, how it changes parties for the better. My second speech will be extending on this. But first, let's get into a couple of bits of setup and that they need to understand. The first thing they tell us is that polls are often not falsifiable and don't portray the truth. The first thing that we will tell you is that we will have rating agencies that say the accuracy of the polls and let people who are on the polls or viewing the polls know how accurate these polls are in predicting things in the past. We'll also say that we'll have multiple polls. So we'll want them to look at issues and then go more into depth on certain aspects of those issues. And then on certain aspects of those aspects, we can have as many as we want. The next thing to note is that this isn't a debate where you're comparing polls versus no information. It's a debate where you specifically are comparing polls versus other forms of information. And what we'll say here is a lot of their comments aren't apparent. Because they tell us that Donald Trump gets ahead because he appears to be popular, so people vote for him. If that is a harm, we say it's far worse under their side where people aren't hearing that he's ahead because more people like him, but he's ahead because the media is talking about him all the time. When the only narrative they have is from the media, which is generally controlled by those parties that have the most ability to advertise, the most ability to have the most significant vote to dominate discourse. That's harmful because that's not objective, and then you only are voting on popularity that doesn't even exist. I'll show you why we think the alternative is better. Lastly, they tell us that this disincentivize political discourse. I'm going to take that and integrate it within my matter. But firstly, we'll give you the initial response that often polls do the exact opposite. When you see that a poll is close, that often encourages people to get involved. If you see that you are in the minority, you previously were complacent that you thought this party was going to be passed anyway, then you're very much encouraged to get involved if you truly want that to actually change. The last thing we'll say in response to all of the analysis that polls only tell you yes or no, we'll say fine. The initial barrier to get you interacting in discourse. People don't just see all parties or who are running don't just see a poll and say, well, people support this policy, let's say change in this way. They generally say, oh, people support this policy. Why? For what? That then means they go and investigate the causes underlying the reasons for that information. The same with people. If they see that there's a poll that they previously didn't understand or didn't expect, then in that scenario, they get involved and start talking about that issue more, even creating that discourse is valuable for them. So with that, let's move directly on to major points across the matter and I'll integrate a number of responses. The first, that would say when you don't have polls, you inherently prevent people from making decisions that could be representative and influential on the political system. The reason for this is when you perceive that something is going to happen, and that your option that you truly would prefer never is going to happen, that means that you aren't ever going to vote for your option. Say, for instance, you support a minority party, but you don't think anyone else does, then realistically you're never going to support them or vote for them when that is your only motive, then you're going to vote for one of the majorities. What polls allow you to do when people aren't directly voting is to see that in fact there are a number of people within that society that do in fact support your minority party or don't support the parties that are currently in power. That then encourages you when you know that there might actually be a chance for that party to get in power to then go and support them. That's important because we now get minority parties. Second, is that we'll say this is far better in terms of when you just have a domination on media in terms of this. Sorry. So secondly, moving on to how this now allows reward protection. We now be passion directly with them, and we think in some cases, we think it is legitimate for individuals to change based on the information that they see. We'll say that there's two actors here. The first is that there are people who have a strong tie to a certain party, no thank you, in which case they are always going to vote for that party. However, we would say there's a second actor, which doesn't have a strong preference between certain parties. They might just like one more than the other. What we would say in these cases is that because we give people a right to vote for parties based on the fact that they think this party is most realistically going to provide for them, we should also extend that right to you knowing that this party is most likely to get in power. So at the moment, I vote for a party because I believe it is 8's chance of providing me with a better salary. I can now vote for a party based on the fact that I believe it has 8's chance of getting into power, which influences its ability to give me a salary. The result is because this is valid information, and so if you don't think that the party you previously were supporting is ever going to win, you should be allowed to know that so that you don't vote for them. Secondly, we will also say that the problem with democracy is that it only takes into account first preferences. This means the party that gets into power, or taking care on voters, is the party that happens to get the most amount of people as choosing it as its first choice. The problem with this is that there are multiple people who may not have chosen that party as their first or may not have chosen the party as their first choice, but would have very strongly preferred it as their second choice. What polls do is they now allow those people to see that if their first choice isn't going to go to power, they then switch to their second choice. This allows us to get far more representation in democracy of what people actually want in these scenarios. It means that there may be a party that has less first choices for it, but it has a lot more second choices. They would then be more representative of what that society wants. We think it's valuable that they get in power.
Polls don't do that at all. They end up persuading the unsure voters to vote for the popular opinion and also the budget. Even if we have minority parties in the first place, you can't afford to pay for those polls initially.
So like sure, we'll fund parties to be able to get more votes. We're quite happy to get as many votes as possible to be as representative as possible. But secondly, for all our reasons I've told you, all of those aren't the direct exist on your side to regulate it. And now it needs to get an objective. And because it's not a final vote, people don't feel weird to express the fact that they don't like the current parties in power, because they know that that doesn't influence the decision people already gave the system. So with that, let's move on to my next point, which is essentially how we get better political parties. What we want to tell you here is that it's very valuable that parties get these polls, and this is a direct contradiction to the matter that they're first. What we would say is valuable within a political party is the ability to adjust, to see that people want these issues prioritized, and so I am then going to prioritize those issues. Why? Because when you get into power, you're then better able to prioritize those issues as it is now within your management. What polling does is it makes parties see which issues are popular, where they are losing support, so they can then adjust to be more representative. Because polls also reflect multiple demographics, in that way, because they constantly give the parties updates of where they are failing, where they are strong, you allow them to adjust, become more representative, and to be more strong. We'll point you to the example in Turkey, where polling suggested that people really didn't like the fact that the major party in power limited freedom of expression. The result is opposition parties then move towards being more liberal within their mindset for providing freedom of expression. On top of this, these polls then make these parties give promises to these people. They tell them that if we get into power, we will do X. These promises are valuable because then you can hold that party accountable once they are in power. So because we get better parties in power, because we get more representation, we are very proud to oppose this solution.
Really were the best way to figure out what's true and what's false. We wouldn't be having a debate, we'd just be asking the audience. The reality of the situation is you must discuss issues. You must understand the reasons why people understand them, and evaluate arguments by their own merit, not by their popularity. That's why we have debates, and that's why we shouldn't have polls. Because we believe that your voice should never be turned into a number we propose. In this speech, I'll begin by addressing the points brought by the opposition, then go over our first 2 points, and then present our third substantive argument about minority rights. So let us begin with what you heard from the opposition. Firstly, what they tell you is they provide information for voters to make decisions. What I would like to point out is that the only information polls provide is how popular an opinion is. If they're talking about the substance of policy, then we can provide that information. The only information they're talking about is how popular something is. That's important. Then they talk about how we'll have rating agencies to make sure these polls are accurate. The problem is, it's very hard to tell after one poll is with a different poll. What we end up with is 2 polls now both claiming to be the best. It's very complicated to sort out which one is right. Furthermore, it's impossible to do that before the damage is already done. By the time you work out which poll is actually correct, the election is already over, and all the harms we talked about have already happened. There's no way to police bad polls, so we have to consider everything that's around. Then moving on to the first argument, information being good. First of all, this is one of the biggest reasons to look for the proposition side. Because when they get up here and say that, they are admitting that one of the biggest things that influences people's decisions is popularity. They say straight up, the reason you vote for minority groups is because other people agree with them. But we think there's nothing about a position being popular that makes it right, and that individuals who determine these decisions based on their own merit rather than popularity, they cannot get up here and say polls don't change the political spectrum, then turn around and say people will vote radically different because now they know it's popular. It's a huge contradiction within their case. They're admitting that polls make people vote based on popularity. That's why you should support the proposition. Then they talk about how we will always have, down here, they say that you will always have better information for these individuals to vote. But if you're talking about what policy helps you out, or what arguments make sense, it will tell you nothing. All it will tell you that other people agree, which means cheapens the discourse and prevents people from evaluating these candidates and evaluating these arguments on their own merit. And we don't seem to earn real response. Then they bring up this throwaway point about how if there are multiple parties, well then you might go for your third choice, but then it won't win because you needed to go for the one that was popular. Have run-up elections, right? We don't think that we need polls to deal with this problem. Then they bring up this last argument about how government should adjust to public opinion. What we told you in our first substantive argument is that rather than adjusting, governments rush to the popular opinion, right? They abolish the carbon tax without ever asking whether or not that was truly good for the constituents. We presented that clear analysis in our first argument, and we never actually heard a response from from team opposition. They're just trying to argue past us. We can clearly show here why this leads to worse decisions and knee-jerk reactions rather than better policies. So having taken part with individual freedom of speech, I'll take a few lines.
And so why is any of the discourse that you provide mutually exclusive to polls? And why is any of the problems you say with the same because of popularity not added to the discourse that already exists that you advocate?
So the reason why polls harm other forms of discourse is for two reasons. Because first of all, they have the veneer of objectivism. Your own intro made this point brilliantly for us. You get up here and say, polls are fantastic because they're objective. We think that claim edges out other forms of conversation as mere opinion. People prefer the hard numbers. And second of all, they're easy. It's easy to talk about poll numbers without having into the nitty-gritty of what policies really are. It gives media an easy way out, so they'll always say it. That's the answer to your reason why. Now moving on to our first two substantive arguments. I would like to point out that team opposition hasn't actually engaged with the analysis we gave you in the first speech. So let's go back through. We tell you that individuals in the majority suffer from a why bother effect, which distorts elections. We gave you the example of Israel. I hear no response. Then we told you that minority voters are discouraged, not encouraged, because yes, well, they know some people agree with them, they know the vast majority don't. I hear no response. Then we told you that politicians rush to popular decisions rather than thinking things through. I heard no response. Then we tell you that there are better alternatives. Politicians can directly engage with their voters and can learn the reasons behind their opinions, merely than the number of what people think what. We think it centralizes people and makes politicians lead to worse decisions. There are better alternatives, and again, no true engagement. Then on our second point, they say, well, the media talks about the reasons behind the poll. But we think this is a fundamentally different conversation. You're talking about why a candidate is popular, rather than talking about whether the policy is a good one. We think those are fundamentally different conversations, that one is valuable and that one is damaging. So let's look at the points we really gave you. We explained to you why media always tends to prefer reporting on polls rather than reporting on actual things that inform voters, and we told you that this essentializes people's views. The conversation doesn't become about what you like about a policy or which specific parts it is. It's yes or no. Check yes, check no. 71%, 29%. We think it essentializes and neglects public discussion. We don't think we've heard true responses to those arguments, and they still stand on the principle of supporting democracy. But now, our third substantive argument is about minority rights. What we tell you is that polls often harm, and in fact, intrinsically harm minority rights. Firstly, we think that these polls often don't poll minorities in the first place, because the mentality of a poll world is one where you're trying to figure out what the majority of people think. You're caring about public opinion. We think that parties often poll their own base, rather than part of the entire sphere. Majority parties poll the demographics that vote for them and don't care about other demographics. Meaning minorities oftentimes aren't even asked what they think in the first place. Then additionally, we think that minorities are always part of the world of polls. Because the world of polls is where politicians care about the majority. We explained to you clearly in our case why that was true. What this means is that minority people will never hear their voices truly expressed in polls because they'll never be able to make up the majority. If a policy dramatically hurts one racial minority, but helps a vast majority of people, then public opinion polls will say, it's a great idea, the politician should do it. And we think because it edges out the minority voices, because media doesn't care about them, because we just talk about the number, we never hear their stories. We never hear the way it affects them, and we exclude vulnerable and stigmatized people from our political discussions in the name of public opinion and scientific objectivism in politics. People's stories can't be quantified. The impact of policies can't be turned into a statistic. And we think that politicians need to listen and need to think, and that polls discourage both of those activities a fair bit. But finally, what we think is that polls are very damaging to social movements, especially for minority groups. Imagine this. A minority group has been wronged, and so they are planning on holding a protest in the city to make the government realize what has happened to them. But public opinion polls come out, saying the majority of the population doesn't agree with them. We think that, first of all, this is a huge incentive to just cancel the protest and not have it at all because they're discouraged. But if they have it anyway, they will be demonized as being out of touch with the majority, refusing to listen to public opinion. And we think that this puts a very negative spin on these protests. We think that when protests are trying to express minority votes, and public opinion poll comes out saying people don't agree with them, it crushes the movement. The movement loses all legitimacy. Politicians don't care about it, average people don't care about it, the media demonizes it, and all of the power of that movement is lost. We think the world of polls is one that fundamentally cares about the majority. But rules of democracy was never meant to be rules of the mob. The power of the ballot was never meant to be the tyranny of the majority. And we believe that polls cheapen political discourse, that they lead to less valuation of what truly matters, and they lead to a knee-jerk reaction by politicians who seek the gratification of the masses. And that is why we propose it.
Modern democracies rely on information. As an individual that's making a potentially risky vote, I want to be able to know about possible outcomes of that risk. I want to be the most informed about my decision and the most informed as to what's actually going to get me the best change and the best difference to my life as an individual. We think voting should enable that. Voting should allow individuals to make greater access to their political lives. In my arguments, I'm going to be talking about how polls create discourse and enhance debate. But before I get onto that, let's talk about the type of individual that we're talking about. First, we're going to look at the individual. We're talking about how we're going to do this above. So we'd like to say that in the majority of cases, individuals aren't influenced by polls. We think that there is a certain type of voting that's influenced by it, and that's the type of individual that we're going to be discussing in this debate. We think the majority of cases, we deal with individuals who have people who are assigned to certain, like the political parties, from when they were very young, or that they have a particular lineage. And because of that, those individuals aren't influenced by the amount of people that support them, but rather the other values that sort of on their side. The type of actor and voter that we're talking about is an individual who thinks that this information is relevant to him. So as a person casting a vote, he wants to know the likelihood of his vote actually resulting in some form of change. What that means is this person's decision to have that information available to them is something which is very important. So let's get on to some explicit about before I get into my own presentation. A lot of my responses will be integrated, I'll show you where. So let's talk about bad information. So the first argument they show us is that oftentimes polls result in worse information than the other. They often reflect the world. So it's in that generally they're quite reflective of individuals. Generally, we're talking about a situation where they're more accurate, reflecting what it means individuals in society are. But we can also tell us that there are lots of them. So we think that when Al Jazeera, scientists, and CNN talking about polls, we think that we can cross-reference those polls to show that they check the differences between them. But we also think that the value, the source of the poll is something that's incredibly important. We think that voters are able to evaluate the specific source where that individual poll came from. So they can vote that if it came from a Republican panel, for example, they probably know that it's going to be biased towards the Republicans. But if it comes from a non-objective, if it comes from an objective third party, like a news reporting program, I think that it's a situation where people can evaluate the value of that source for themselves. But also that people know the nature of it. They know that this is the exact outcome, but this is the general trend that they can expect come election day. But we also know that any defense of the alternative that they provide. Because the alternative is a world where big parties with lots of funds and resources and capital dominate the airspace in advertising because they can afford it. That's what happens. What happens then is that you drown out smaller minority parties. Minority parties don't get heard because the airways are dominated by Donald Trump being controversial and lots of other issues. We also think that without polls, we may not even see smaller parties. We think that polls have an exact incentive to be as objective as possible. Polls coming from like a source like The Economist, for example, is going to look for as many parties as possible in order to make sure that they get the most holistic view of the business fair. Again, that country was often knowing the status of polls. So we talk an argument the basis of like further we discussed that was incredibly important, but it gives voters more information about what to vote. So if you are an individual that's likely to think about this, knowing that this is all voters, we do think that it's a significant minority, we think that because an individual has a decision to make. Either you vote for the very small party that absolutely reflects you, that's never going to get to Parliament, and never going to give you any reasonable change. Or you vote for your second preference, which is more likely to win, and therefore provide you with better access to change and preferences in your life. We think that you should be able to make that decision. You should be able to know what your second preference is and their likelihood of winning. We think that voters need to be able to make sure they can make a reasonable change to their own lifestyles. And it's not that people rush to object to compromise. They simply go straight to the conclusion about the next issue. I'm going to show you why we want that debate. Before that, we think that this is a simplistic analysis. What they do is they make concessions to what the voters want. We think that in a situation, they get most reflective to what individuals in society want and are an individual. But in terms of minorities, we think that there's a huge importance placed on them in votes. But there's also an importance placed on them within discussion. And in that, I'm going to get into my argumentation. Oh, it's like this is the source. So before I do, I'll take it in one second. But I'm in this conclusion, what I'm going to be showing you is that increases involvement in the political sphere, that triggers debates, that enhances the quality of debates that we have.
Okay. So only minority voters change parties based on goals they see. Why will their new parties be responsive to their needs? That's only minority.
Well, we think this isn't about the parties, right? We think that certain parties, that's a different type of party that we're talking about. The parties that we're talking about are individuals that want to change their votes. We're talking about the specific voting. Parties that moderate their views see that when they make a certain decision and that they're losing the polls, they may want to change that decision because that decision affects the voters. We think that in some cases, those decisions drastically affect the votership, and in those cases, we allow moderation. So we believe these are the two distinct classes of thought that we have this argument for. So let's talk about the nature of polls. So we think that they're generally broadcast on live news channels such as Al Jazeera or CNN, but also they're quickly available to the people. They're often in places like social media platforms like Facebook, so that where individuals of any sort of group can engage in that discussion. Not only that, they're also discussed in depth and in relation to the topics, generally by experts and journalists within the political field. So we think that it does two things that's particularly important. Not only does it influence the quality of the discussion, but it also influences the reach of the discussion and the amount of people that are involved. So how exactly does it create this discussion? What is the quality of it that happens? So we think that the first thing that it does is it creates an important reason as to why people are holding question as to why a certain party is winning or losing. So it creates a question upon performance. We think that if you see a party that is winning, you're more likely to interrogate the reasons as to why that party is winning than not. That means that the reasons for that is more likely going to be policy discussions that they want us to happen. We think that in order to ask the right questions, we need to know the context of those questions that are being asked, and the political polls are an important way of analyzing them. We think that we need to interrogate the reasons as to why certain parties are taking a second, or winning or losing, that directly leads you to the discussions that we want to be having. But it also creates for a more formalized and a more structured discussion. It means that we're having a within context in relation to what's been happening in the political sphere. Because we can do different polls at different times, we can discuss certain policies in an effective way people think. We can discuss those policies with better depth.
Many of your impacts rely on the idea that polls for minority parties. They do the opposite. Polls give media an objective reason to completely disregard minority parties.
Well, we think that it's very important to focus on smaller parties in the political sphere where they happen to be doing well. When a smaller party makes an important splash, you might want to interrogate the reasons as to why that's happening. That means that you have a direct incentive to talk about the issues that are happening right at the bottom. That means that we have more importance on smaller parties, we have more importance on people who would be forgotten under their alternative of some big parties advertising, drawing out others. But we also think that it creates that it's very effective in terms of working in the environment. So this is what we talk about how to get more quantity. We think that polls are very quick information, they're easy to read and easy to digest. And on one hand, with so much information, it's often very difficult for us to sit down and have very long-winded debates, watch television debates, issues that we don't necessarily understand. The thing is, if we can ask the questions and answer the questions that are relevant to us by seeing poll results and discussions, under people are influenced by the decisions or posts that they see on social media or on television, that incentivizes them to find the questions and answers that are relevant to them as individuals. That means that we get voters who care about not only what affects them, but also what affects the entirety of society. So because we think that polls are an important indicator of where a party is, because it provides important information to voters that are important to create better political relations. We're incredibly proud of
I too would also like to know the information or the results of what my vote would actually be. However, I don't need a poll to tell me that. Instead, I can look at forums, I can look at blogs, I can look at actual information involved in the policy. I can find a lot about what my vote would do instead of looking at how popular a policy is. Rather than simply focusing on website opposition is telling you today about how popular people can actually influence you in a good way, we're telling you that it can actually lead to all the negative effects that we continuously talk about time and time again, both in our subsequent arguments as well as in the debunkes that we have given you. So in this speech, I'm going to do several things. First, I'll begin with clarification on our model, and then secondly, I'll go into the three flashpoints. First is on this idea of the principle of democracy and which side of the house actually upholds better. The second flashpoint is who actually helps moving forward. And the third is about this idea of how do we actually take into account minority rights. But first, let's talk about the model. On the model, they tell us that we should provide information, and there are many different purposes, such as by CNN, by all these other individuals, that can allow for us to have better ways to deal with it. However, first off, we would say, yeah, provide people with information. Instead of having CNN broadcast popular polls, we should instead have CNN broadcast the different intricacies of a policy. There's no reason why information is only guaranteed by having these polls. And in fact, we tell you that the harms that come out of policies outweigh any marginal benefits that they're actually talking about. They also say that many different polls are going to be able to exist. However, our argument is that these many polls that exist won't be able to take into account the totality or even the truth, because it's very hard to disprove these studies, and by the time we disprove it, they'll already go away. This analysis was clearly done by our second speaker, and we still have yet to hear a response to it. They also say that rich people are only going to be able to afford the model that we have with alternatives like forums and blogs. However, an everyday person can go out to the street and actually talk to the people they're trying to get vote for them. When mayors engage in local elections, they go to churches, they go to schools, they engage with the people they want to have vote. There's no reason why these alternatives are only accessible to the rich. If anything, having only polls is accessible to the rich or richer parties because they can set up a multiplicity of websites and create an illusion that a majority of people are actually supporting their policies. We're saying that our model better is able to take away that influence and allow us to have more direct responses and more direct engagement with people. Yes?
If people can find oil stimulation elsewhere, there should be no problems about individuals changing their votes based on popular opinions that exists.
Actually, no, because you ignore the analysis we have on why polls actually co-opt this impact that's happening. First, we tell you it's very easy to just submit a poll and not do the extra research you need to do about a candidate. What average citizen, after they submitted a poll about yes or no about a policy, is going to then go against Google, research this policy, see the intricacies, see the different opinions that are happening, and actually change their mind. We also tell you that you condense these discussions into hard facts. You even say it's objective, and first saying that type of mentality is what makes it so problematic in the first place. Instead, we should have things like more political discussion and more information displayed. But let's move on to the substantive argument. First, we tell you that under the idea of the principle of democracy, the debate is going to fall into side proposition. Under this idea of democracy, we tell you that we give a more quality discussion. We allow people to actually engage in it. We incentivize politicians to actually participate and speak to the people that they're trying to convince to vote for them. They continuously talk about how there's no call about popularity, and this is going to impact, there'll no popularity, and it won't impact their decision. But in the next breath, they tell you that this popularity will be able to persuade the unsure voter. We ask side opposition to clarify this contradiction in their case, because they're not clearly telling us how exactly this popularity factor is going to take into account. In fact, we tell you that if popularity is going to influence your decision, this is uniquely harmful for this idea of democracy, because we're not actually going to participate in the ways in which we can have a way in which we can have more people happy as a result. For example, can you imagine if popular opinion showed someone like Donald Trump being actually good? Can you imagine him having peace talks? Can you imagine him having good political discussions that actually take into account everyone's perspective? If popular opinion and the massive reports that CNN gives on individuals like this are influencing the voter, that is not something we stand for and say that it should be rejected. So on the idea of the principle of democracy, we are more inclusive because we prompt individuals to engage. We're also saying that there are even polls where whether it's internet or telephone, don't take into politicians actually directly go into these neighborhoods and participate, because that creates a better way in which we can uphold the principles of democracy. So let's move on to our second substantive class, which is who actually helps with the voter. They say that you're likely to interrogate once you see that the popular opinion is going towards this person. But we already gave you the analysis as to why this will happen. We have to recognize that people are unfortunately lazy. As a result, once they already submit a poll and see that popular opinion, they're not going to interrogate that. We give you time and time again where this actually harms individuals, and we give you the example of things like Israel, where this actually creates more harm. Yes?
If people are lazy, why do they do polls again for reading these topics, for looking at discussions, policy?
Okay, Chris, we're saying that we begin to challenge that type of stigma, right? On side proposition, we want individuals to actually be more engaging. When you give them the tools to enable them to be lazy in the first place, of course they're going to take it. Of course they're not going to engage in that deliberation. We're saying we have to challenge that so that individuals can actually become more informed about the votes that they are casting and create better laws within society. We're also saying that the voter is going to help because they can learn about different types of parties, different types of ideas, different types of discussions. We continuously tell you that polls are oftentimes brought out by richer or more popular candidates. When we allow for discussion to be holistic, we allow for more minority parties to actually express their views and show individuals and show voters how exactly their opinion is going to help. Under this idea of helping the voters, they tell us that most are not necessarily influenced by polls, but just some are influenced by polls. However, that also contradicts their principle, because how exactly are we going to make sure that the voters are taking everything into account if we're only isolating into certain individuals? Who exactly is side opposition standing for, and what type of voter are they looking at? We're telling you that we're looking at the whole picture and actually making sure everyone is involved. But that brings us to our third topic, which is in regards to minority rights. We have heard no analysis on our third substantive point that talks about how minority rights are actually more harmed in the world of poor, because even by definition, they are excluded. People of color, people who are poor, people of alternate sexual identity or sexuality are not included in this majority pool, and as a result, no one listens to them. This has two different impacts that still were not resolved. The first is that these individuals either will not protest and actually express their views, and this is going to be bad. They get the idea of Ferguson and how that became popular, but if you really want to look at America, you can see the harmful impacts that happen because the majority of people feel like all lives matter, or these protests are not necessarily something that we have to be generating. The second analysis we tell you is that this actually induces more demonization. When you allow for the demonization of these groups from participating in these protests, they're going to end up being labeled as enemies of the state or enemies of the popular opinion, and as a result, individuals won't want to participate. This creates a cycle in which individuals are not expressing their voices, going back to our first argument about how people will be like, why do we even care about these elections in the first place? Why do we even care about expressing our opinions? Why do we even care about protests? At the point where side opposition is actually silencing more individuals, particularly those that are not only minority parties, but actual minorities themselves, that's always going to be a reason why you're going to be preferring side opposition in this debate. Because we stand for all types of discussion, we are proud to do.
USA of all countries was going to argue for democracy. Instead, what they actually
to people at the end of the day. Ultimately, I'm going to show you why it's necessary for us to have polls to prove the nature of politics firstly, and the way that people interact with the political system. And then secondly, I'm going to show you why polls are specifically beneficial to the nature of voting and the kind of choice that voters are exposed to. But before we get onto that, two very important strategic mistakes from the other side of the house. One, they haven't shown us why the vast majority of their problems with polls are inherent. They've told us about how polls don't ask every party. They've told us about how they don't specifically target minorities. They haven't shown us why it's impossible for us to fix those harms. We would be perfectly happy to insist that people ask minorities as well. Second, they haven't shown us why all of their ideas of having nuanced discussions about why people have opinions, about going and asking people in the streets what they believe, are mutually exclusive to having polls as well. Because the truth is that a model with polls, as well as whatever information they present, or even a model with just polls, is always going to be better than an alternative that leaves up our understanding of the whole of society to media and subjective reports. And that's what we're ultimately going to show you today. So, first fact, let's look at the nature of politics specifically, and why polls don't worsen the nature of politics, but in fact make it better. So, what was the first thing they told us? They told us that the problem with polls is that they're too simple. They tend to be yes or no answers, and so politicians just cater to what people want, as opposed to the reasons why they want it. First, we say that all of their alternatives in which politicians interrogate people as to why they believe things, or the media does so, are not mutually exclusive to the current model. In fact, all politicians have an incentive that they can only implement their policies to the best extent to get the most support. They want to know why people say yes, why people say no, so that they can get more support and change people's opinions. They're always going to try to get that information. Difference though, when you have a situation where you don't have polls, you don't take on the politicians to understand what is important in the first place. They don't know how many people care about gun control or care about abortion. So when then are they supposed to try to understand why people have those beliefs if no one understands how much those beliefs actually matter? At the very least, we give those politicians a starting point. But second, in the vast majority of cases, we think that we can just make better polls, right? Let's just put an option at the end of the poll that says which one of these reasons is the reason you don't support this thing, A, B, C, or D, or other, come back and ask us again later. But no, we often don't need the understanding of reasons. We don't need them to directly tell us their reasons for those answers, because they're very easy to predict. If we're looking at something like abortion, we're pretty familiar with why people do or do not support abortion. You don't need to understand their personal life story to look at the difference between pro-life and pro-choice movements. Realistically, government already has that information. And we know that we can get that information, do get that information anyway from the media, because the media does have this incentive to go and understand why is it that so many people are supporting the seemingly crazy Donald Trump. They go and they find that out, and they have a direct incentive to do more than just support polls. One very simple reason. If you're looking at the media, they are a market. They are competing. Each news channel is trying to be the most interesting. If they all just report the polls, no one gets a competitive advantage. To get that advantage, they want to go into communities, they want to understand why, to have the most interesting stories so people watch their channel. You get that information anyway, but we give it to you better. So all of this stuff our politicians aren't going to understand why people believe things and so make poor decisions, just as true in today's debate. They use it. But secondly, they told us that polls don't ask minorities questions, and why that's not. First, you say nothing. We would just make it really necessary for people to understand minorities. But second, we just, like, that argument actually refutes their second, because if someone looks at the poll and they can see, oh, all minority parties have been left hopeless, then it's unlikely that they're going to say, oh, minorities are so tiny that we don't care about them at all, and I'm going to get more to that in a second. So we have a little bit of a tension there. But lastly, these decisions are able to recognize when minorities have been left alone, so it's not that unreflective. They know when minorities are there. Lastly, let's get into this past. Let's look at this idea of minority groups. So here they told us the problem is when you release these polls, minorities are very, very small, they become negligible in the eyes of the public, and people start supporting their groups. Why is that untrue? First, because the nature of minorities is something that is dispersed. If you as an individual, your only interaction with the gay community is the one gay person that you know, that seems like a very, very tiny portion. But if you have a whole minorities, as in fact like 10, 15, 20% of the population. The reality is that if you want to make minorities bigger, recognize that they are dispersed and get a holistic picture of how big they are. They can never give you that. In fact, I'll take you in a moment. But lastly, their alternative is far worse, because even if we see minorities as just 5% on the scale, that's barely the minimum. It's up to the media to try to seek out these communities for us. We would rather these be sold as 5% than 0. Go. The idea that just 1% consume minorities really contributes to communities are the opposite of saying. You say that the majority actually changes policies. We're saying that this is actually one great way in which minorities are completely ignored in the discussion. No, the reality is that if you want minorities to be a part of the discussion, you need to at least give them some percentage. You give them 0% under any comparative that model is followed. But wake up call to the other side of the house. Politics is the reason that parties prioritize majorities, because they want to win, not the nature of polls. If you want people to care about minorities, at least tell the world that they exist. We're the side that's better for those minorities, but more of a preventable politics unresponded to analysis about how this enables politicians to properly adapt to which groups actually want them. We think it's fine if politicians want to get majority support. That's the nature of democracy. We're cool with that. Now, why is this necessarily worse than their alternative that they put? Because the truth is that even if polls weren't valuable, the law without polls is always going to be worse. Because when you leave all of this discussion and this discourse up to the media, to individuals from just their communities support, the media, who has an incentive to only prioritize the most scandalous or exciting things. The media is not going to talk to you about the majority, they're going to talk to you about Donald Trump. They're going to talk to you about UKIP and make those seem like the majority. If you're worried about people tending to the middle, this one should be tending to the actual middle and not what the media thinks is exciting to talk about. That's also better than some kind of community-based system in which your necessary bias, when you go on a forum, they're going to talk about how much the Republicans and how much the Democrats and whatever party is, what they think and why they're so important. If you want an accurate reflection of this information, also the most objective and realistic way to get it. But lastly, we also talking about how there is a very, very valuable aspect to this debate about what voters are able to do. Because if you as a voter both value this minority party and the bigger party that's really both pretty good, if you vote for the minority and you use that as credible, but if you realize that there is a chance that your second choice or your other choice could have won, if you had voted for them, we give you that option. We give them the choice to inform their votes on the truth of the world around them. If you support democracy, contrary to popular belief, today you support South Africa and not the United States.
We will now move on to the team's 4-minute moving reply speech. The opposition will deliver their reply speech. There are no points to be submitted during reply speech. After 3 minutes, the time teacher will signal on to let the speaker know that they have 1 minute left. After 4 minutes, the time teacher will signal twice. To deliver the opposition reply speech, I call upon the speaker.
Democracies should aim to educate people about the politics. When most people don't know what the comedic idea is, the side opposition is telling that that idea likes is false. But in a commercial way, talking, they get journalists to discuss important issues that are pertinent to individuals' politics. My reply speech today, I'm going to give you 2 parts of that. Firstly, I'm going to talk about what's better for voters in terms of decisions and incentives in debating. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the better part of interaction discourse between parties within the political sphere and which side benefits that. So what's the first fact of what is better for voters? So the first thing that we told you was largely unresponsive to that you have more information to work than asking a receiver. As an individual who doesn't know whether or not the importance of their vote on the party that gets represented is more important than having a party that is likely to win. We think that we enhance that voter's ability to make that decision, give him or her more information about it and allow that individual to be able to better pass that decision. But it's also as an alternative, people should be able to read the news to find out what policy, should be able to search for information, and that's the way that they should determine the importance of certain issues, and therefore cast their vote for decisions on that. But they also tell you that people are lazy, and they're not going to do this if they're not incentivized. So we think that at least on our side of the house, we get lazy involved. We think that that particular unit is particularly important. We think that democracy, when you don't have people caring at all, we think that we get that involvement that's far better on their side. But we also think in the real world, people who aren't lazy, they just don't know where to go. They want to know individual questions, but they don't have the time and effort in order to find the answers by the questions that they can answer. So what helps you is that they spark that information, structure it in a way that people can know exactly the right questions that they want to ask and answer. But we also think that this is better the way that parties respond to information. We think that this is important. So when people react to polls by making voting decisions, parties react to polls by making policy decisions. So when a party implements a bad policy and thus reduces support in the polls, it can moderate that policy in order to gain more support from its people. That is an important factor for a party's ability to represent people and be reflective of the society that should be voted with. It allows parties to be better at all countries. But we also think that none of their analysis, even in voting issues, encourages their side on polls. Even the alternative that exists in the status quo is far worse. The ability for big politics to screw certain mainstream media to big parties, we think that's something that's incredibly damaging. But we also think it's important for minority parties. We think that they're not existing in our polls because polls group people within the individual group that allows them to get better access to see just how much support that they have. But it also gets certain agencies to care about their resistance and an alternative when that doesn't happen. So let's talk about the second factor, which is who gets better interaction with individuals. So what they tell you is in this shop discussion, they tell you that the entire field of journalism, all people that are discussing these issues and commentators aren't really care about the reasons as to why certain parties are performing, but only whether or not they're popular. We think that that's a huge dismissal of a very important part of our journalistic society, because the goal of those individuals, the incentive of those individuals, is to analyze the reasons as to why they're involved or not. What that means is that you get the reasons that they need. You get the reasons as to their policy implementation, what they stand for, what they don't stand for, which is an important action which can be delivered to the people, get individuals to discuss across the broad spectrum of ideas. So we think that this is a better incentive for individuals to engage in discourse, because it's a better incentive for journalism to engage in discourse, also better for the role of condensing that information and allowing individuals to access it. So we think that the net today, not only we show this is better for certain individuals, but it's also better for minority parties, it's better for the political sphere as a whole, it's better for the way that parties interact with voters. We think that we're incredibly proud to stand on team side.
And now, to conclude the case of the proposition and the debate as a whole, I call upon you.
More than anything, both sides in this debate care about democracy. What we tell you on team composition is that an election is not a pageant, and that democracy is more than just what the majority wants. And that team opposition has built their case on assuming that a system of democracy is far simpler and far less beautiful than it truly is. In this speech, I wish to show you on two levels why team opposition undermines what is to be a democracy. First of all, on a practical effects level, and second of all, on capturing the spirit of what a democracy is. So let us begin on who leads to better democratic practices. Now, I would like to point out that the only real advantage that team opposition claims in this debate is that people get to base their decisions on polls, and so that will lead to better decisions. But what we tell you is we just don't understand why knowing the popularity of a position is so important. And we don't think South Africa has actually explained it to you. They tell you, oh, you need to make sure you don't vote for your first choice instead of your third choice to be strategic. Okay, have runoff elections. We told you that 2 speeches ago, they never answered. But then they say that, well, you need to know the popularity in order to know how the policy affects you. We think there's absolutely no link here. You need to know the policy to know that it affects you. Not what other people think about the policy, whether they like it or not. They've never actually shown why popularity is valuable, even though that's the one thing they actually stand for in their case. I just don't see a reason to vote for the opposition. Then on the influence of the media, they tell you that they agree that our alternatives are good, but there's no reason why they're exclusive with having polls. Well, I'll give you the 2 reasons that I gave you all the way back in the second speech, because the same fetishization of objectivism that they engage in their case means that the media cares more about objective numbers than people's opinions, and second of all, polls are much easier to report on than integrated policies. We told you both those reasons clearly 2 speeches ago, and instead of engaging with it, South Africa tried to just make the original argument over. We say that these better alternatives, talking about the policies, cannot happen in a world with polls, no response. Then on the policy of results, what they say is that they will make parties better because of the better political results. The first thing we tell you is that we give you clear analysis in the first speech as to how it undermines democracy. We talk about Israel, where polls actually distorted the results of elections because of the psychological effects we have. We continually talk about the program, and again, we just heard no response. If polls distort democracy, they can't possibly promote democracy. Then they talk about how this will help minority parties. But there's a huge contradiction here. First of all, they say polls are good because the politicians will shift to the majority opinion. Then they say polls are good because it will make everyone care about the minority. Both of those things can't possibly be true. Then they go on and say, oh, well, it will help minority parties because people will see how popular these minority parties are. They're minority parties. They're not popular. That's what makes them minority parties. Minority parties are hurt by polls, not helped by them. What we tell you is if you care about better results and better democracy, you have to look towards a world without polls. Then we'll look at the principle of democracy, because we believe they undermine and misconstrue what it is to be democratic. Democracy is not the tyranny of the majority. This has been one of the defining clashes of democracy. But they get up here in the third speech and say almost word for word, we're okay with people only caring about the majority, because that's what democracy is. We say no. We say democracy is about respecting everyone's voices, not converting them into a statistic. When minority parties, when minority groups protest against public opinion, politicians ignore them because they're the minority. The public demonizes them because they're going against the general will. And the parties themselves get discouraged and don't have these protests in the first place. Again, we haven't heard any true response analysis in the round. So let's look at how the entire round comes to a close. Team South Africa misconstrues what democracy is, argues that it ought to be a tyranny of the majority, and then fails to even achieve that vision of democracy. We say that polls distort democracy, lead to worse decisions, and impoverish all of our discussion and the rights of democracy ought to guarantee to us. And that is why we proudly propose.
Ladies and gentlemen, the adjudicator of the application please stand and help the